Welcome back everyone. Earlier this week, I received my new Canon R5 Mark II, and I've been testing it out over the last few days, and I want to share the results of those tests with you today and give you my initial first impressions. One thing that really sticks out to me, which is probably going to come as a bit of a surprise, is that they moved the on-off switch from the left side of the camera to the right side of the camera. And so I have switched the camera from photo to video mode about 1,000 times rather than turning it off. So that's a bit of an annoyance, but it's going to take a little bit of getting used to. I'm sure that you've heard by now that the Photons to Photos website did some dynamic range testing comparing the R5 Mark I and the R5 Mark II, and they discovered that the new camera actually had slightly worse dynamic range than the original camera. In fact, the camera is about 0.4 EV worse when it comes to dynamic range at 100 ISO, and at 400 ISO, the Mark I has 1.33 EV more than the new camera, which is a huge jump there. So we're going to explore that a little bit. At ISO 800, it's basically the same. They also did some noise testing and found that they were practically equal except for at ISO 400. In order to determine if this dynamic range difference really does make a difference, I decided to do a test with Sophia using both cameras. I started off by lighting the white background with 2 strip softboxes. Then I lit her from the front with an optical snoot, and I used the blades inside in order to restrict the light into a square pattern, and I did so that there would only be light on the upper half of her body and no light at all on her black dress. I then closed the drapes and turned off the lights that I usually use to record this video. But I did capture the screen recording of the new camera. I'm shooting compressed RAW or C-RAW on both cameras, which I have been using for the last year and a half, give or take, with the R5 Mark I. The images were shot with a daylight white balance, and I processed straight out of camera TIFFs using Canon's Digital Photo Professional. I used the same settings for both cameras, and I didn't make any changes during the shoot. Let's start off by looking at the images that I shot at ISO 100. Looking at them here at full screen, it's very hard to tell any difference. But if I zoom in, maybe it's clearer, and if I put a waveform monitor up on the screen, you'll see that the image from the R5 Mark II does have slightly deeper blacks. If you're not familiar with waveform monitors, they're used in video in order to make sure that you're getting your exposure right. It shows you the tones from left to right in your image, and then it measures them on a scale with 0 at the bottom and 100 at the top, pure black and pure white. You'll notice that the scale does not touch the 0 line, meaning that none of the blacks are actually clipped. If we look at it at ISO 400, I can tell that the Mark I has brighter blacks, and the waveform monitor does show this, but again, the blacks don't go down to 0%. At 800 ISO, there is no substantial difference in the waveform, which confirms the Photons to Photos testing. If I raise the exposure by 3 stops in DPP, you'll see the same differences here at 100, 400, and 800. So all is as to be expected, but none of the blacks were pure blacks, which makes me think that I'll be able to recover these with some more sophisticated post-processing. While I normally use Capture One, I was able to take the photos into the newly updated Lightroom and recover the shadows in the ISO 400 image. I'll be looking forward to August 28th when Capture One is supposed to release the color profiles for this camera, and then I'll be able to test out the post-processing of the images more clearly, but the fact that the blacks are not hitting the 0 line does tell me that there's information there that is more than likely recoverable. If you could take just a moment to like, subscribe, and sign up for the bell, I would really appreciate it. Also, if you could click on the links in the description or on screen, that will help support me to make more videos like this one. So let's talk about our next test. This time I want to shoot regular RAW so you can see what that looks like, and I'm also going to create a painterly portrait using my Elinchrom 190cm indirect octobox here on the right side of the set, feathered in front of Sophia. I would normally use a fill source for this type of shot. It could be another light, but it's often going to be a V-flat from V-flat World, but I didn't do it on this shoot today because I wanted those blacks to go as dark as possible. I did leave the video lights on while recording this test, and here's a frame shot at ISO 800 without flash, and you can see that everything is basically black, so those video lights weren't really having a big impact on the shot. Let's look at our first test here, shot at ISO 100. Once again, the R5 Mark I image is on the left and the R5 Mark II image is on the right. Unfortunately, she rotated the ladder here a little bit during these shots. So when I zoom in here, I'm going to pan over slightly or all the way to the left so I can minimize the impact of the ladder because I believe that there is some pure black there under each one of the steps. So you can see here with the waveform monitor that there is a little bit of a difference, but really not much of a difference. At ISO 400, other than the reflections on her nails, the two images are basically equal. And according to the photons to photos test, we should see a dynamic range difference here in the shots, but I don't actually see it. At ISO 800, the two images look basically the same, but I do think there is some pure black here underneath the steps on the ladder. Now let's look at the photos boosted up 3 stops. The background next to the trunk may have more detail, but I can tell in the waveform monitor that nothing is pure black. So it should all be recoverable. I think the key takeaway here is that there is a slight difference and there is a little more tonality there in the R5 Mark I image, but again, nothing is pure black, so I don't think that it's going to matter that much. And I think it would probably only matter if you really screwed up big time and you needed to correct things, because you should be on set doing things more correctly and using a fill light if you're really wanting detail in those areas. And the idea that I would want to see detail in her black dress in that particular situation when I know that there's zero light on it is a little bit absurd. However, after seeing the results from photons to photos, I think I will try to shoot at ISO 100 if I can in the future because it will give me the lowest noise and the best dynamic range. I actually didn't know until I saw their test that as you increase the ISO, you decrease the dynamic range. And had I known that before, I probably would have kept shooting, trying to shoot more likely than not down at ISO 100. And that's what I'm going to do here going into the future. So I want to take a second to talk about video. So during the last 5 years that I've been making YouTube videos, I've been using a C200 or a C70 to shoot these videos of me sitting here talking. And on rare occasions, I did use an R5, but I didn't really like it because I have to shoot C-Log3 on the R5 and I love shooting C-Log2. In fact, the LUT that I use all the time is a C-Log2 LUT. When I saw that the new R5 Mark II had C-Log2, I was really excited about that because it made it possible for me to switch from using 2 cameras for photography, my main and my backup, and 2 cameras for video, the 2 angles that I'm always recording for this channel or when working for clients, that I could switch from those 4 cameras and just get 3 cameras that were the same camera, the R5 Mark II. So this seems to be a very exciting possibility. And so I wanted to test that out. And so I did a test here in my home office. Don't mind my resting bitch face. I think I was over the 4 hours that I spent setting up the camera and the manual. And I shot 4K, the highest quality 4K that each camera can shoot. The settings on the 2 cameras were exactly the same. And as you can see, the C70 footage looks to be about 1 stop brighter. Then I added the LUT that I usually use, and finally I tried to grade the footage so that they looked the same. Then I tested the 2 cameras in 4K long op, I applied the LUT, and then I graded the footage. And I think you can see that the R5 Mark II is just as good or perhaps better than the C70. Here is the R5 Mark II with the highest quality 4K on the left and the long op on the right. My beard might be sharper on the left, but is it worth 3 times the amount of data? Next, I wanted to test out how the C70 and the R5 Mark II work in the side angle that I usually shoot in my studio. This time, I gave the R5 Mark II one extra stop of exposure. On both cameras, I used my Sigma Art 14mm, but the C70 does have the speed booster on, so I know it's not quite fair. But the real question here is, can the R5 Mark II replace my C70? I tested both cameras with the drapes closed and the drapes open, and the R5 Mark II appears to have more contrast and sharpness. So it really does seem like this new camera could replace my cinema camera, so that's really exciting. Over the next few weeks, I want to test out the camera more, shooting more video and shooting more photos, and I'm really looking forward to August 28th when Capture One updates, and then I can finally look at the images in post using the programs that I'm used to using. And in case you were wondering, this video today was shot on the R5 Mark II in my teleprompter using a 35mm 1.8 shot in 4K HQ long op, and I turned on the digital IS because the 35mm was just kind of a little too short. I previously was using my C70 with my 28-70, and I would use that lens at 28mm. And so that was roughly the same framing that you're seeing right now. But on that camera, I was not always excited about it. I felt like the corners bent a little bit with that lens and things were a little distorted, and I really didn't like it. So hopefully using the digital IS doesn't make that big of a difference. Please let me know in the comments below how you feel about the video from this camera, and if you feel that it looks just as good as the video used to look that I would shoot with the C70 of me sitting here in my office. Also, let me know what you think about the photos and the difference in the dynamic range. And if you could please click on the links that were on screen and in the description, that'll help support me to make more videos like this, and I would really appreciate it. So thank you so much for your time. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.